Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone. I'm really pleased to see such a good turnout today for Dr. Lyons' talk. I want to first of all thank our alumni board for putting this together. This is the first in a speaker series, a NPRE Leadership Speaker Series. So not only is this the first, for which we're very thankful from the alumni, but also we have a very distinguished speaker for us today. I'd like to give you a little background and then maybe some personal comments. Though Pete doesn't know this, the first time I recall meeting him was in 1999, so it's been 15 years. I'm sure he won't remember this because I was in a gang of nuclear engineering department heads that met him. To back up a little bit, he got his PhD in nuclear astrophysics at California Institute of Technology in 1969. Then went to Los Alamos, actually in those days Los Alamos Scientific Lab, I'm sure, and now Los Alamos National Lab, and spent from 1969 to 1997 at Los Alamos. And I'll come back and say something about that. Following that, he went to work on the Hill in Washington with Senator Domenici's office from 1997 to 2005. In 2005, he joined the Nuclear Regulatory Commission from 2005 to 2009. And I'll say a word about what's happened since in a few minutes, but I really want to start this by thanking Pete very much for his support of our program and all the undergraduate nuclear programs in the US. And I want to say something about that. So what I recall is 1999, department heads were on the Hill, and it was mandatory for us all to go to see Senator Domenici, actually Pete in Senator Domenici's office. He told me this morning that he was one scientist and there were 50 lawyers on the staff at that point. But I have to say that he did more than all the 50 put together as far as I can tell. He was the one person who was instrumental in reestablishing the nuclear program. Let me go back a little bit and tell you about his time at Los Alamos. He spent a good amount of time working on the nuclear deterrent program up through the 1980s. I think this was largely successful for the end of the Cold War, a very major part of that, and stayed on through the 90s. I was out at Los Alamos several summers in the 90s, and it was a major transition period for Los Alamos to reestablish their tremendous talent and resources in the post-Cold War era. And Pete was a major part of that. I think after that, any one of us scientist people would be happy to go back to the lab, but instead he went to Senator Domenici's office, took a major career change, and had for the next many years a major role in reestablishing the nuclear power program in the US. At that point, and actually a little bit after that point, there was no money at all in the nuclear energy, Department of Energy program. And so Pete was very instrumental in making that program come back to its leadership position in the world over the last 15 or a little more than that years. So this was very important. And of course, as I say, every time we were in Washington during that period, this group of nuclear engineering heads, we always stopped by the office to talk to him and maybe get a little reassurance that the zero in the budget at the time would be maybe changed by the time the real budget came out. And from that point, we hadn't seen him very much. But a few years ago, we were there as a group, and he'd agreed in his current position to come talk to these nuclear department heads. It turns out that date was March 11th, 2011. He made a few comments and said, I've got to get back to the office and see what I can do about the Fukushima incident in Japan. So we were there with him the day that became a big deal, the start of that whole event. Go back a few years before that, after his term, or near the end of his term at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, we awarded him through our North American Technical Center of the Information System on Occupational Exposure, the Radiation Safety Professional of the Year. This is the point at which he was near the end of his term. We weren't sure at the time at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and this was to acknowledge his efforts on the safety side of nuclear engineering. So at this point, I think what he'd done is the trifecta. He's had a major role in the nuclear deterrent and ending the things that really ended the Cold War and rebuilding Los Alamos. He'd rebuilt the nuclear energy system through his efforts from Senator Domenici's office, and he'd worked on nuclear safety. So I thought that's a tremendous accomplishment for anybody at that point of his career. And this was maybe 2 or 3 days before his appointment in NRC was up, and I asked him, will you get reappointed? And he said, doesn't look very likely. And I said, well, then what will you do? He said, I'm going to go on a cruise and see the polar bears. And fortunately for the polar bears, he and us, the rest of us, he took on his current position, which is Assistant Secretary of Energy for Nuclear Energy, and has, from that office, directed the rebuilding, I think not just the rebuilding, but the reestablishment of the leadership of the nuclear energy area in the U.S. And so with that introduction, Pete, I welcome you to make a presentation. We have time for questions afterwards, so please think of things while he's talking. Very happy to have you here.
Thanks, Tim. Well, thanks for that very kind introduction. But what you didn't say is I did go see the polar bears. I took a month between the NRC and the DOE, and I'd always wanted to go see the polar bears while there were still polar bears to be seen. I had heard of an outfit called Cruise North that's entirely native Inuit guides. They use a Russian icebreaker, and they go up into the Hudson Straits, and they look for polar bears. And every day you get off the boat on Zodiacs, and you go cruising around little islands and climbing around looking for polar bears, always with an armed guard right behind you. But nevertheless, we found lots of polar bears. Usually we found polar bears busy eating something else, eating seals, eating walrus. But we did find polar bears, and they do still exist. And it's a beautiful trip. So that was my respite between NRC and DOE. But I am very pleased to be with you folks here today. It's been a fun day. I've had opportunity to interact with a number of the faculty, a lot of the students. You've got a great program here, and an awful lot to be proud of. And as you'll hear from this talk, well, I'm committed, but so are a lot of other people, to the importance of nuclear power in the United States as we look towards a clean energy future. So with that, let me start with a few comments, a few quotes from the President. He's spoken repeatedly about the importance of clean energy. That first quote I like. Some folks want wind and solar, others want nuclear, clean coal, and natural gas. To meet this goal, we need them all. And the President gets it. There's no silver bullet that is going to solve the nation's and the world's clean energy problems. It's going to take every clean energy source that we can get. And even then, it's going to be really, really hard to get to the point as a world where we need to be with clean energy. A second quote, and this says at the Ohio State University, so if any of you are from Ohio State, you'll be happy that the is attached to it. But in any case, the President made the announcement on the Small Modular Reactor program. That's how much he cares about nuclear power. And that last quote down on the bottom is one that, to me, is very, very important. The debate is settled, climate change is a fact, and when our children's children look us in the eye and ask if we did all we could to leave them a safer, more stable world with new sources of energy, I want us to be able to say, yes, we did. And to me, that's why I'm in the current job. I'm guessing that's why many of the faculty are in the positions they are. And I'm hoping that's the goal of the students in this program. Whether you're in a fission program or a fusion program, we need clean energy, and nuclear is going to be a part of it. And at least any credible study that I've seen looking at how you're going to get to a clean energy future says nuclear is going to be a big part of it. You can't do it I mean, I've seen studies that I would not claim to be credible, but I would say that any of the credible studies say you need nuclear to do it. Dr. Moniz from MIT took over as Secretary of Energy in the president's second term. Many of you in this room know Ernie, Dr. Moniz. At MIT, he authored many of the key studies on the importance of different types of clean energy, not just nuclear. But along the way, he authored a little report called The Future of Nuclear Power, another key report on the future of nuclear fuel cycles. He's extremely knowledgeable on issues of clean energy and the role that nuclear power will play in meeting that future. And these quotes are typical of many, many comments he's made, recognizing the importance of nuclear energy, recognizing the role that we hope that the small modular reactors can play in years to come. And that last quote, talking about the all of the above statement. The president speaks frequently of all of the above in terms of solving the energy crisis. And Ernie's comments here is just very, very clear. It's not a slogan. It's really what we have to do if we're going to move towards the clean energy solution, the clean energy world that we're all going to need looking into the future. And Ernie makes the comment here about nuclear power being a part of that future. Nuclear power isn't a silver bullet. Neither are renewables. Neither is anything else. You have got to look at a mix of solutions, certainly efficiency, certainly renewables, certainly nuclear, hopefully fusion, hopefully economical, clean coal. But all these are challenges, and they're going to have to work together to achieve the world that we're looking for. Now, not too many years ago when I was at the NRC, we talked about a nuclear renaissance. And we expected that renaissance for the United States. At that time, we had 28 applications filed. I'll show you on the next slide what's happened. But I think if you look today and realize 72 reactors under construction in 16 countries, there is a nuclear renaissance ongoing around the world. Now, I'll show you on the next slide where we are. I'm not sure we're in a renaissance, but around the world, we definitely are. And if you look at the number of reactors that are planned, also very, very substantial numbers. And again, these are countries that also recognize that in order to move ahead with clean energy futures, nuclear is going to have to be a part of their energy portfolios as well. And if you look carefully at this slide, you're going to find some mistakes. Every time I look at this slide, I find another mistake. But for the most part, it's accurate. I mean, there's some greens that should be yellows and yellows that should be greens. So if you want to go find them, fine. But it generally makes the point that nuclear around the world is very much alive. You can point out there are countries that have gone the other way. Germany has chosen to go the other way. It will be fascinating to see what the results of the German experiment are. In the meantime, Germany is building a lot of coal plants, and German electricity prices are 3 times that of France. That may be what they want. It's their country. But in any case, they're embarked on an experiment, and it will be interesting to see how it comes out. Now, their experiment is supposedly to get to 80% renewables, but in the meantime, they're building a lot of coal along with a lot of renewables. So different countries are making different choices, and there's certainly going to be differences between countries. And again, there's no magic solution. There's no silver bullet for all countries. Countries are going to make different choices. They're going to have different natural resources and different opportunities. So it's very much country and region specific, but nuclear power is going to play a substantial role. Now in the United States, the good news is we have 5 plants under construction, 5 new plants. That's been a long time since I could say that. But if you look carefully at this slide, there's some bad news too. If you look at the capacity in blue, for a lot of years it was flat, but it has started to fall off in the last couple of years. We've had 5 plants either close or announce their closures. And these are driven by economics, not by safety. And that is a source of great concern within our department. We recognize that the closure of any clean energy source, nuclear or anything else, is not exactly in the direction that we need for a nation trying to optimize our clean energy portfolio. You'll note here also some uprates that are proposed. They've pretty much stayed constant. The applications have fallen off substantially. We reached a peak, I think, of 28 applications when I was at the NRC, and we started to staff up for handling that number of applications. We didn't anticipate shale gas and the dramatic reduction in the price of natural gas within this country. And on the one hand, that natural gas is a tremendous economic boon to the country, doing wonderful things for our economy. But it is presenting a challenge to any of the clean energy sources. And nuclear is no exception here. Now, as we look towards, as we look at a slide like this and recognize these closures, it does bring home the concern that I mentioned on closure of a clean energy source. We've done a lot of looking within the Department of Energy asking whether there is a federal fix to the closure of these nuclear power plants. And frankly, we haven't found it. This was a source of discussion today with several of the faculty. And there may be different opinions to some extent on this, but in general, these are state solutions, not federal solutions. There still are some ideas we're considering from a federal standpoint, but for the most part, it's at the state level where decisions are being made, will be made, on the future of the nuclear power plants in different parts of the country. And where there's current economics that are against some of these plants at the moment, particularly in deregulated environments, it's going to be up to states, and Illinois is most certainly one of the states in the middle of these considerations, that are going to determine whether there are additional closures, which additionally complicate our quest for clean energy, or whether there can be mechanisms found in the market to keep these plants operating and continuing to produce clean energy. From an administration standpoint, and I've implied this already, our concern starts with the carbon implications of retiring any clean energy source, not just nuclear. We've looked at several different models, trying to ask what this means in terms of carbon emissions for the country. If you look at the start of this curve off at the left side of the graph, it's a high number that comes screaming down. Well, that's great, we're reducing our carbon emissions. That's the switch from coal to natural gas. But then we go on to project different levels of closure of the current fleet. 5% is effectively what we're already seeing. We have no idea what the fleet closure could be. We've done a lot of modeling. We think 30% is an upper limit. But just making the point here that if these clean resources close and are replaced with really the only thing that can replace them today for baseload power is natural gas, this is what happens to your carbon. So we're making progress on carbon today, but as we lose any of these nuclear power plants, we're making it harder and harder as a nation to move towards the clean energy solutions that we need. I've already mentioned that many of these challenges, the majority of them, are at the state level, although we continue to look at what might be levers that could be used at the federal level. Now, the rest of the talk is going to be a very, very high-level discussion of some of the Department of Energy programs that are addressing nuclear energy. By no means am I covering all the programs within my office. If there's questions, we can get into that. And I've had an opportunity during the day with a number of you to talk about a number of different aspects of our program, and I'm happy to continue that in Q&A today. But to go on with some of the key elements then, there's a loan guarantee program. This was passed in the Energy Policy Act of 2005. By 2005, I had actually moved to the NRC, but I was honored to be part of authoring several of the sections of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. And I had responsibility to author the nuclear power, renewables, and hydrogen sections of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and contribute to the tax policy side, which was where the loan guarantee was developed. That loan guarantee has now been applied to the Vogtle plant in Georgia. $6.5 billion in loan guarantees has been awarded. They are still working on an additional component of that loan guarantee that will take that number significantly higher. But loan guarantees are one thing that a government can do to try to encourage clean energy construction within the country. And this is by no means only for nuclear. There are substantial loan guarantee opportunities. I think the total for the country is around 70 billion in a number of different fields. 18 total was for nuclear, of which 6.5 went here. So loan guarantees are one mechanism that can be used to encourage clean energy development within the country. And relatively recently, the department has reissued a $12 billion loan guarantee request for, well, I shouldn't say request, has reissued for comment a $12 billion portfolio for loans for nuclear power, extending all the way from existing plants to small modular reactors to different front-end and back-end front-end facilities. So that's out for comment. There will be then, when those comments are analyzed, an additional call for $12 billion, roughly, in proposals for loan guarantees related to nuclear power. So the government continues to look towards loan guarantees as being one of the ways in which we can stimulate production of low-carbon sources. We're very interested in small modular reactors. I could give complete talks just on SMRs and why we see them as potentially very important. But to give it just sort of a few comments in a nutshell here, the large plants now, the AP1000s being built in Georgia and South Carolina, are built by very large utilities. Southern Company is one of the largest in the country. It can handle the kind of investment, 12, 14 billion, required for a couple of AP1000s. But we have over 3,000 utilities in this country, and the majority of them couldn't begin to fathom financing a 10 billion plus program. The SMRs offer nuclear in much, much smaller chunks, down to the point where they should be within the range of many of the companies now that have nuclear power plants that may be retiring in the future, or other utilities that are interested in moving into nuclear power. But for any of you nuclear engineers in the audience, and I know there's many, you're well aware that as you go down in size of a nuclear power plant, you've got opportunities to dramatically improve the safety and security of that plant. We're looking at plants here that are highly passively safe. And again, for the engineers, you're well aware that by passive safety, what we mean is you're not requiring operator actions to be done quickly in an emergency situation. The existing plants in this country are actively safe, not passively safe. The existing plants around the world are actively safe. Now, the NRC drills constantly with the plant operators to make sure that they know what to do in an emergency. Fukushima, some of the appropriate actions were not taken. Admittedly, lots of extenuating circumstances. But the litany of things that went wrong at Fukushima is not pretty. And just perhaps as a couple of quick comments on Fukushima, when the Japanese parliament published their report on Fukushima, they started out with the words, "This was an accident made in Japan." And those are amazing words for anyone to say in Japan, given their culture, much less to come from the Japanese parliament. The number of missteps that went into Fukushima in Japan, starting with not having an independent regulator, is kind of amazing. We have an independent regulator in the NRC, and I was proud to serve there. But Japan did not have an independent regulator. It was run by industry. And that's not what you want to do if you want to have serious regulation of your nuclear power plants. In addition, to vent containment at those plants required the prime minister to say vent. In the United States, the senior reactor operator has the authority to vent containment. And when you don't vent containment, really bad things happen. And that's what happened. That's one of many things that happened. So, putting Fukushima behind us, passive safety, as well as the regulatory system in the United States, is very, very important. That second bullet here, actually, maybe I should say a little bit more on the safety issues. Passive safety is important, and in the SMRs, with their very small size, you can carry passive safety to amazing limits. In the case of NuScale, which is one of the two companies that we're supporting, their plants are passively safe indefinitely. Those plants do not use pumps even under normal operation. There's no question of will the pump fail if the power goes out, because there's no pumps. They rely entirely on convective cooling. Now, the AP1000, the gigawatt class plants, are passively safe for 3 days, and that's great. That's a long ways better than the current plants that require correct operations within 30 to 60 minutes. But the NuScale is indefinite passive safety. That's a tremendous change. Other comments on here, the reduced capital cost, I think I've made that point. These are much, much smaller systems, make it more feasible for more utilities. Shorter construction schedules. Our vision of this is the SMRs will be built in a factory setting. The concrete work will be done on a site. The reactor will be moved to the site, essentially ready to go. Far shorter construction schedules, which has driven up the cost of many large plants, and far more predictable schedules. The fourth bullet, replication in a factory setting. Our vision remains to be proven, is that these will be built in a factory where you can control your quality far more than if you're sitting out in the middle of a field trying to do a precision weld. Now, obviously, I'm exaggerating, and there's more and more work being done in modular, even in the large plants. But with the small modulars, you can completely control the environment in which you build that plant, and you can be using workers who have gone through quality assurance procedures and are doing the same as they have done the previous units. Now, last bullet, meeting growth incrementally. The SMRs, the NuScale is 50 megawatts, B&W is 185 megawatts. It's a far cry from the gigawatt plus plants of the larger class. So a utility can buy what power they need now. It's not a matter of waiting until you need a gigawatt on the grid. You turn a gigawatt on the grid, you better have a pretty big grid there to take it. With these smaller units, you can do things incrementally. You can be earning money on the first few modules while you're building more. We see a great deal of flexibility. I think in the future, if the SMRs work out as I hope, that the future will be a mix of the gigawatt class, passively safe plants, and the small modular reactor, passively safe plants. And exactly what fits in any one situation is going to be up to the details of that utility and the particular needs there. But it will give, I think, two different opportunities, different paradigms that can be used for nuclear construction. Light water reactor sustainability, another very important program that we have. We've got a number of, many of the plants in this country have now exceeded their 40-year initial licensing time. I believe the number is 74 out of our 100 plants have now applied for and received extension of another 20 years from 40 to 60. But what we're asking in this program is, what is the potential to go beyond 60 years? We're certainly not saying go do it. We're saying, what are the components, what are the issues in a plant that you would have to deal with if a decision were made to go beyond 60? And that decision has different aspects from different perspectives. From a utility standpoint, they need to know what they have to replace, what particular aspects they need to pay particular attention to. And from a regulatory standpoint, they have to know what will be the regulatory questions that might have to be asked in a different way to move beyond 60 years. At the moment, no plant has applied to go beyond 60. There are at least rumors that there are a number of plants carefully considering it. From the utility perspective, it'll be an economic and safety question. And from the NRC's perspective, it will be a safety question. Now, I've had people ask me, how dare you suggest that, if you will, I drive an 80-year-old car? Well, as I hope everyone in this audience knows, a 60-year-old plant or a 40-year-old plant has very, very few components that are 40 years old. That thing is under constant maintenance, and very, very few components are the age of the plant. Now, the concrete is, the cables are, and the pressure vessel is. And that's honestly about it. So we have focused our research to better understand the aging mechanisms on each of those different parameters and to apply that information. Now, along with this, and listing down at the bottom here, We've also had considerable work in advanced instrumentation and controls, and we talked some today about the new control room simulation lab, which has been built at the Idaho National Lab to help in this work. We've talked some today with some of the different groups on looking at PRA, probabilistic risk assessment, which ties in to improvements in risk-informed safety margins. And again, this is work going on within this program, and also within this program is all of our work pertaining to understanding the Fukushima accident. Just as from TMI, we learned vital lessons that improve the safety of nuclear power here and around the world, it's important that we understand exactly what transpired at Fukushima and examine our own plants and our own procedures to be sure that we have taken that into account. So we are working as part of an international consortium comparing severe accident models from a number of different countries to see how well we can reproduce the Fukushima accident. It's going quite well, but we can't do it all until they get further into the decommissioning and we can see exactly what is the condition of the fuel, exactly where the fuel moved. So it's a work in progress. But my main point would be that it's within this program that we are counting on learning the lessons from Fukushima and understanding the extent to which they could apply. And the NRC's already done some of this, but understanding the extent to which Fukushima further informs the safety case within this country. Accident-tolerant fuels. Some of the students that I talked with today are working in the accident-tolerant fuels program. We started this program before Fukushima, but boy did it get an increase after Fukushima. Has substantial congressional interest, congressional earmarking specifically to this program. And what I'm showing here is a number of different attributes that could be associated with accident-tolerant fuels. Again, all of you nuclear engineers know that we've used zirconium cladding for years. It works, we've improved, we've tweaked it. The zirconium claddings get a little bit better each year, but they're still zirconium claddings. And we've known all along that if you get zirconium hot enough and you get steam around it, you get hydrogen. And when you get that hydrogen generation, if you don't do the right things with that hydrogen, you see things like the explosions at Fukushima, where the hydrogen explosion in several of the units. And that took a bad day into a really bad day. So we have been very interested to ask, what could you do to avoid the type of hydrogen buildup that certainly complicated the Fukushima accident, complicated TMI too. So we're looking at a number of different claddings and fuel compositions that would dramatically change some of the key parameters that are shown here. Our goal is to make a down select in 2016 among a bunch of really good ideas. We've got universities, you're contributing. We've got national laboratories, we've got industry, all presenting different ideas and working on different concepts for accident-tolerant fuels. There's a tremendous increase in material science knowledge between when we started on zirconium claddings, heaven knows when, 50s, and now, and asking what can you do differently. So we're exploring everything from, some are exploring silicon carbide cladding. Silicon carbide looks good. You're certainly not going to generate much hydrogen, but it's brittle, and there's some challenges. Can you make the closures that you need? You've got to put end caps. It's one thing to make a tube of silicon carbide. It's quite another to put a cap on that tube. In any case, there's good progress being made on silicon carbide. There's teams working on specialty steels. Come a long ways in 50 or 60 years. What can we do today that we couldn't do then with very, very thin, very strong steels? You've got to get them pretty thin so you don't poison the reactions, but it's looking very, very promising. And then there's other classes of ideas asking what can you do with different coatings on different claddings. You could do a silicon carbide coating on zirconium. You could do a silicon carbide cladding on specialty steels. And in each case, we're trying to understand what would be the reaction kinetics, how much can we reduce the hydrogen, and also what are the economics. Because if you're ever going to introduce this thing on a mass basis, certainly it has to go through all the regulatory processes, but you've also got to have something that is economic enough that it can be used. And it's also got to have sufficient confidence that industry will be assured that the leak rates will be as low as they've achieved with zirconium claddings today. And some of you are probably well aware that there's tremendous effort goes into avoiding a leaker in a nuclear power plant. You have to shut down and find that leaker fairly quickly if you have a leaking cladding. Now it's less than 1 part in 10 to the 5th of our claddings that leak in this country. That's great, but if we're going to introduce a new cladding, it better be as good. So challenges, I think there's a real chance of success. And my hope is that by 2016 we make that down selection, that it proves to be successful. We're restarting the Transient Test Reactor at Idaho National Lab to do transient testing on whatever we select. We're building up a post-irradiation examination capability at Idaho, also to take the fuel that we will force to fail in treat and carefully evaluate the morphology of that fuel. So in any case, a number of our programs are tied around accident-tolerant fuels, and it's one of our very, very important areas. University programs, and you're certainly in the middle of this. Since I've started in this job, I've dedicated 20% of the R&D resources in the program to universities. It's done entirely in a competitive way. I'll show you in the next slide, but it will be no surprise that you've done very, very well. We've awarded, I think this is $350 million or so since the time I've been at the Department of Energy. A lot of scholarships and fellowships. Everything is done competitively. Some of these are individual PI types of awards. Some are, we call them integrated research proposals, where we invite university consortia to bid on very broad programs of interest to us. But it's, to me, a very, very important program. I view it as training the next generation of leaders, many of you in this room, who are going to be contributing to nuclear power for decades to come. And the NEAP program, Nuclear Energy University program, is a very, very important part of my program. For your campus, last year was kind of a typical year for you, $1.2 million in awards. A little bit of information on some of those awards. Since we started this since 2009, you're over $8 million. Those are pretty big numbers from a university standpoint. They show the quality and the competence of your programs here. But I think even more important, they're helping to train many of the students here for the leadership positions in the future. As I get towards closing, the President has tried very, very hard to find ways to control carbon emissions. There was an attempt on cap and trade in the first administration. That didn't go over. When I was with Senator Domenici, we talked about carbon taxes many, many times. And I made the point that carbon taxes would be a really good way of doing this. And he made the point that nobody in their right mind who wants to get reelected is going to propose a carbon tax. And he's probably right. He was right on a lot of things. So carbon taxes haven't happened. Cap and trade hasn't happened. This set of comments was made shortly after the Environmental Protection Agency announced Regulation 111D, which, as I'm trusting many of you know, requires states to cut their emissions by 30% by 2030, and requires state plans as to how they will accomplish that. This is something that the President can do, the administration can do within the administration. It does not require Congress. Now, 111D has been proposed for comment. There are certainly aspects of 111D that have raised concerns in the nuclear community. There are, I'm sure, I've been told there are thousands. In fact, I've been told there are millions. But in any case, there are a whole lot of comments that have come in on this draft. Those comments are due by December 1st. The EPA will be evaluating those comments, I'm guessing, for a very long time. But out of this, hopefully, will come a version of 111D that the EPA is ready to propose. We'll see where it goes. But it's another attempt by the President to say carbon is a real issue. We have to find ways to control it. And in the absence of congressional action, this is one way of approaching it. And stay tuned. And of course, you've heard other very exciting announcements recently where the president has succeeded in negotiations with China that I think many viewed as almost impossible. But to try to get China to agree that there needs to be a cap on carbon emissions for China. That's an amazingly big deal. Anyway, carbon really goes through this entire talk. The need to move towards low carbon is essential in this country, and like that first quote I showed, is essential in the kind of world that we're going to leave to our children, and in my case, my grandchildren. I talked about the continued demand for nuclear power. These are all AP1000 construction sites, passively safe Westinghouse plants, fully certified by the NRC. Summer and Vogtle proceeding well in this country. The Chinese started 2 years before. They're well ahead on they're 2 years ahead on their construction. That's Sanmen and Haiyang. Sanmen should be online by the end of next year, next calendar year. And I mentioned 70-plus plants being built around the world today. Depending on which story you read in China, either 18 or 28 additional AP1000s are under consideration there. And we should be proud of the role that the US government played in certifying the first type of passively safe large reactor. And we should be relieved that China is taking a significant interest in building passively safe NRC certified designs. Let me just close, last slide. You've all seen this picture. I look at this and see a lot of bright spots, but I focus on the dark spots. And you could point out that some of them don't have a whole lot of people, but some of them do. And the opportunities for all of you to contribute to helping clean nuclear energy, to make a contribution to filling in the blank spots, certainly is what I think we should strive for. And with that, let me stop. I'd love to take whatever questions you have, and thank you very much for a great day today.
You mentioned earlier when we got, thank you. You mentioned earlier when we got the chance to talk about how renewables and nuclear need to work together instead of against each other. Do you see load following with nuclear becoming an approved way of working with renewables like solar, where they're only producing power during the day?
Well, the small modular reactors are being built for load following. The plants that we have in the United States today are not built for load following. The French have built their plants for load following. The French, you could easily suggest, have gone too far with nuclear, at 75 to 80% nuclear. That's so much nuclear that you've got to load follow. But load following is not a good way to run a nuclear plant. And it's not an efficient way. It's stressing on the equipment. And if you want, certainly your optimum is not to load follow. Your optimum is to do something smarter. I talked with the students today about a program that I've pushed very hard, and I'm very excited about it. Program between INL and NREL. For those of you who don't know those acronyms, Idaho National Lab is the lead nuclear laboratory for the country. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, is the counterpart for renewable energy in Golden, Colorado. I've pushed, and I've worked with the Assistant Secretary for EERE, and he's pushed to bring those two labs together to work together. And I think we need to move, and he agrees, I strongly believe we need to move beyond a mentality that says renewables and nuclear are competitors. Nuclear and renewables are the two for sure sources of clean energy that we have going in this country, in the world today. Certainly we want clean coal to come along. We hope it does. You have important demonstrations within Illinois. I've been working on fusion. I started working on fusion in the 1970s. I'm sincerely hoping that fusion comes along. It was 30 years away in 1970. But still, fusion hopefully is out there. But today you've got renewables, you've got hydro, but you're not going to increase hydro in this country. If anything, you're going to lose hydro. So you've got renewables and nuclear power. And what I'm asking, what I'm pushing, is for those two laboratories to work together and ask, what can we do to optimize the utilization of both? And what you quickly decide, the obvious conclusion, is that you want both of them to run flat out in a mode where they're most efficient. And you want to be sure that the sum of the two always exceeds your peak electricity demand. But then you want to find something to do, something that you can do very quickly to switch electricity that you don't need into something else. And that something else could be all kinds of different things, but the one that's getting a lot of attention is hydrogen. When you go with this type of a system, you'd be using renewables and nuclear for completely clean production to supply all your electricity needs. But then you would take those electricity sources and you'd ask, what can I produce, or how can I store energy in a way that allows those clean electricity sources to contribute to something else, some other energy form that we need that's also clean. By going to hydrogen, you're then moving clean electricity into clean transportation. And exactly how you use that hydrogen, you can debate. You can use the hydrogen for fuel cells. You can go with a direct internal combustion hydrogen-based engine. You can go with, you need hydrogen for biofuels. So in the refinement of biofuels. But you would then be effectively using hydrogen production as a way of storing clean energy and a way of moving energy over into another sector. I'm very excited about this, and I think that as we look into the future, the thing we should most avoid is a fight between clean energy sources. You're not going to power this country on renewables, you're not going to power this country with nuclear, but the combination can be very, very effective. And if we can use the best attributes of clean sources to maximize, to minimize our overall carbon footprint, that's setting a very important example. So I'd much rather do that than load follow. To me, load following is what you do when you don't plan ahead.
Expanding on that question, of the 5 power plants that were shut down, 3 of them probably were not very close calls, but 2 of them arguably failed at Kewanee, and Vermont Yankee failed at auction. Since renewables and nuclear power should be dispatched differently, is there anything that could be done to make them treated differently at auction? Because push come to shove, they could have come up with a contract that those 2 sites, 1,200 megawatts, wouldn't be where we are today. So you said you've been challenged on that today. I'm more specifically thinking of those 2 particular sites. That was really an economic issue. There's nothing technically wrong with those 2 facilities.
Well, I would argue that the other 3 that were closed also were solvable technical issues. It just took money, and the economics wasn't there. So I was equating all 5 as economic, but I don't disagree with your point either. Well, Crystal River was a big deal, but and also stupid, but that's a separate issue. As far as, well, there's several answers to your question. For example, PJM is reevaluating their auction program, and they're changing the capacity rules for the auction in the future of PJM. And they've recognized but that's not a federal issue. That's the PJM ISO that's doing that, independent system operator. But again, that's not federal. That's a local or a regional solution. I think the polar vortex last winter, and frankly, it feels like you're in one again, but the polar vortex last winter brought home to many folks the very poor way in which we value different energy sources. Prices for natural gas spiked. Somebody may know the number, but it was, I think, by a factor of more than 100 in the polar vortex in some parts of the country. And some places you just couldn't get it. There were many problems at the coal plants. I believe PJM lost 22% of their capacity. I think that's the number. During the polar vortex, the resources were simply not available, either because they couldn't buy the natural gas or they couldn't get the coal. And coal, I mean, obviously you got to have a train that keeps running and you got to have a pile that isn't frozen. And both of those are problems. In the meantime, the nuclear plants just cruised through, no problem. No plant went down. in the polar vortex. They didn't care. They just kept working. And I think this is brought home, and there's been a number of discussions with FERC, on this question of valuing the energy resilience of different energy sources. And what one might look at could be something like, and this is for FERC to decide, but could be something like asking how many days of fuel are on site. In other words, what else are you depending on to get fuel there to operate? Well, a nuclear power plant's typically 18 months. Coal, there's a pile of coal that will last a few days, but you better have a train coming in to replenish that, and again, your pile better not freeze. Natural gas, it's in the pipe. Trust us, it's coming. It's not on site. Exactly how this might be cast into a resilience argument, I don't know, is under debate. But this is at least one possibility that we are discussing. But it would be up to FERC. This is not a DOE decision if something like this were to be done. So you've got PJM recognizing the problem and moving ahead with an alternative capacity market. You've got FERC, and 3 of the FERC commissioners have spoken publicly about the need to start, 3 of the 5 have spoken publicly about the need to find mechanisms to better value the resilience of different energy sources. And this, of course, says nothing about the carbon. I mean, FERC does not have a mechanism to value carbon, and neither does PJM. So these are pieces, but again, it's challenging to see from a federal perspective what one does. And just as you're having detailed discussions in Illinois, there's other discussions going on in New York on some of the less profitable plants. It's going to be a real challenge. But many of the solutions will be local, or at least regional.
At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned, when you talked about the distribution of the nuclear power in the world, that Germany, if I'm not mistaken, is not planning to build any. And I'm just curious, what is the reason for that? It is by far the strongest European economy, as we know. And then we have France as the neighbor, who is like 75–80%, if I'm not mistaken, also, that you mentioned. So is Germany having too much coal and they're not thinking about that, or something else?
Well, I don't think I'm in a good position to speak for the Germans. The Germans have stated they're going to phase out nuclear power. Their stated plan is to move towards 80% renewables. I know, at least for models of the United States, I've never seen a credible model for 80% renewable, for 80% anything. They must have credible models. That's certainly up to them. You might find it amusing or interesting. Germany's done this before, to say they're going to phase out nuclear. And I was with Senator Domenici on a visit in Europe in, I don't know, probably 2001, something like that. He was meeting a very senior minister in the German government. And he asked the question, what are you going to do when you shut down your nuclear plants? This was for their previous shutdown. And the answer was, we'll buy it from France. And he couldn't stop, Senator Domenici couldn't stop laughing. I mean, the idea that France is going to depend, that Germany is going to depend on France is not exactly the way world history has been drawn in the past. I don't know. I mean, that is their plan. I know I'm correct in my statement that prices of electricity in Germany are 3 times that in France today. It's up to Germany. And it's a fascinating experiment. Well, I'm sure we will all learn from the experiment. But I don't think it's up to me or anyone else in our government to say that it's right or wrong. It's their experiment. It's certainly going to be challenging.
There must be other questions.
Well, I answered an awful lot of questions today for other groups. I may have answered them all.
Will there ever be a paradigm shift in the United States from just light water reactors to possibly using fast reactors as far as energy production?
Well, I hope that will be carefully evaluated. We are putting substantial resources into Generation 4 reactors, a lot of research in that area. The current chairman of the Generation 4 International Forum is my deputy, John Kelly. I've served on the Generation 4 International Forum as well. Generation 4 reactors are fascinating. On paper, they offer some significant advantages. It remains to be seen if the country will move in that direction. And at the moment, we're trying to make sure that we have strong research programs to be ready if that decision is made. But I think for the foreseeable future, if you look at our technology base in this country as well as our regulatory base in this country, it's going to be light water reactors. And as the current fleet eventually ages to the point where it's shut down, I think there will at least be, it may be a bridge, of the passively safe large plants for those utilities that can afford it, and the SMRs for those utilities that can't afford the big plants. And of course, they will evaluate other sources of hopefully clean energy too. But I think the work on advanced reactors will continue. It may get to the point where there will be enough enthusiasm in industry to actually start moving ahead. I mentioned, I don't even know in which meeting today, that in the current House mark, the House version of energy appropriations right now, there is funding for a planning study for the next test reactor. That's in the House version. Remains to be seen if it will move into a bill that is eventually passed. But that's at least to me the kind of effort that would have to go in to helping us to understand an answer to your question of starting to move beyond light water reactors. But like I said, we have to recognize that we've got a whole lot of experience on LWRs in industry, in regulations, and before the nation is ready to move towards an alternative coolant, they've got to have confidence, a very high level of confidence that that's the right thing to do. So stay tuned. I'm hoping that some of you in this room will be the first to run a Gen 4 reactor commercially. We'll see.
It seems that every time I look in nuclear news, there's always an article discussing the carbon-free programs, and there's always a debate on whether nuclear is going to be lumped into those carbon-free. How come there is a debate at all on whether nuclear should be lumped in with carbon-free sources? Is it a public debate? Is there an economics in that if nuclear is lumped in, that the renewables, the traditional renewables of solar and wind, that they can't compete in an environment where nuclear is included? Or what is the reason that there should ever be a debate on why whether nuclear would be included on a carbon-free?
My response would be that most of that debate's at the state level. Not entirely, but at least at the administration level, the agreement is that we will talk about clean energy sources, not renewable energy sources. Sometimes people forget that, but that is the guidance that we have. There have been several cases, for example, Senator Bingaman, when he was in the Senate, tried to move away from renewable energy standards to clean energy standards, which to me is the right way to do it. That's what we care about. That's what we should care about, is clean energy. Now, many of the renewable standards, however, are state-based. And some states have included nuclear, most haven't. And again, those are debates that will be handled at a state level. I couldn't agree with you more. There's no logic to me in excluding nuclear. And some of this debate goes on in Europe too. You've got states, you've got countries in Europe that don't want nuclear, and they don't want it included in any of the various clean energy mandates. You've got others that recognize that nuclear is an important part of clean energy. So I think the debate will continue, but I think in this country, a lot of it is at the state level.
Hello. I was wondering how economically competitive is SMRs compared to natural gas? And I know natural gas is projected to go up, but like the U.S. isn't the only country with deposits of natural gas, hydraulic fracturing-based natural gas anyway.
Well, maybe several comments. The The difference in price of natural gas around the world today is dramatic. It's a factor of 6 between the US and Japan on the cost of natural gas, factor of 4 between the US and Europe for natural gas. Some countries in Europe are interested in exploring fracking, some have banned fracking. So I don't know how that works out. But are there other supplies of natural gas? Sure. On the other hand, they're always going to be finite, and you'll always get into the debate of how finite are they. On the question of are SMRs competitive, well, we've done a number of studies that suggest to us that they can be competitive as long as they're built in a factory environment where you can take advantage of a learning curve, where, and there's any number of examples, whether it's airplanes or nuclear subs that are built basically in factories, and you see the price start to decrease as you repetitively build the same units. With those assumptions, SMR look very positive. But we're a long ways from answering that question. The first part for SMRs, the first step towards an answer, is NRC design certification. Because until you have that design certification, you don't have a design that you can fully cost out, and you don't know what the operational requirements are going to be. Talked some in one of the meetings today. The NRC demands 5 reactor operators at the controls for each reactor. Okay, does that make sense for an SMR? NRC is going to have to evaluate that. If they stay with 5 operators per reactor, it's going to make it extremely hard for SMRs to be competitive. But from an NRC isn't going to ask the competitive standpoint. They're going to ask it from the standpoint of how many operators do you need to safely run this plant? And it's going to be up to the individual vendors to make the case to the NRC that based on the type of reactor, the safety characteristics, the passive aspects, whatever attributes apply to that reactor, the vendor is going to have to make the case to the NRC that you need X operators per reactor, not 5. So to me, it's much too early to answer that question. I could show you reports that are at least very promising, but they're reports, and they're based on paper reactors. And I'm sure many of you remember the quote from Admiral Rickover on the difference between a paper reactor and a real reactor. And I couldn't go through it completely, but basically paper reactors are cheap, they always work, they're on schedule, and real reactors cost a fortune, are never on schedule. It goes on, it's a fascinating quote. I think we've done enough with the SMRs to take them well past the early paper stage. But until they have NRC certification, I don't see how we answer that question. But I think that's the kind of test or kind of experiment that is appropriate for the government to undertake, to get it through design certification. That's what we did with the AP1000, and then we watched it take off. ESBWR, GE, has now gone, finally, as their design certification. We'll see if it takes off. And we'll find out with the SMRs too. But as you can tell, I'm kind of using the same example. I worked a lot on NP 2010 and helped start it. And it worked once. I'm trying to see if we can do it twice. So we'll see.
Speaking of NRC certification, you brought up the idea of the hydrogen economy and of reactors, excuse me, potentially co-generating hydrogen along with electricity to kind of follow electricity demand. What would a certification process of something so drastically different, of generating hydrogen instead of electricity, which is going to involve an entire plant change, what would that look like to the NRC from a safety standpoint?
Depends on how you do it. There's certainly designs for hydrogen generation that would require very close coupling between the reactor and a chemical. Let me back up. The 2 standard ways that are talked about for hydrogen generation, one is high temperature electrolysis, the other is the sulfur iodine cycle. On the sulfur iodine cycle, you've got to have reasonably close coupling to be sure that you're getting efficient transfer of the heat into the sulfur iodine process. That is going to be a challenge for the NRC because they're going to have close coupling. Now, for high temperature electrolysis, that is not the case. You're going through the electricity step. You could, I'm not saying you have to, but you could then have significant separation between the reactor and the high temperature electrolysis. Now, if you try to use the reactor as the source of the high temperature, then you may be back in the model of, well, then you got to couple them fairly closely. So you're asking a very good question, and that obviously is important, it's going to have to be addressed, but we're not to the point now of knowing how this would be done. The work that's been done at Idaho National Lab suggests that high temperature electrolysis probably is the more flexible, simpler approach, basically a reverse fuel cell. Looks very promising. And the higher the temperature, the better. So there will be at least a motivation to use the temperature from the high temperature from the reactor to heat the electrolysis cell. But again, stay tuned. It has to be considered. It's by no means a trivial question, but I don't think we're ready to answer it today.
So I was wondering, how do you feel about France's decision to have such a high percentage of nuclear power? And even like China's building 42 new nuclear power plants. Is that the way that you would expect us to move towards, or should we be keeping our nuclear power percentage to more of a minimum?
I may not have followed all of your question.
Okay.
How do I feel about France and their 75% nuclear? And then what was the next sentence?
And the next sentence was, do you think that we should be moving towards that percentage, or should we be keeping our nuclear percentage more to a minimum?
Well, my comment was based on, if you go to too high a percentage, you're forcing yourself into load following. And the question was over in here about load following. And load following with nuclear plants is not the world's greatest idea. You can do it, you can build plants to do it, but you're forcing substantial temperature gradients into your system, and that's going to lead to additional wear on the plants. But I think what the right number is, I don't think there is one answer. And frankly, that's why on the study I mentioned between NREL and INL, we're doing 5 regional studies, because it's not going to be one answer. Different regions are going to have different potential, in this case, for different types of renewables, and as well as different availability of natural gas. So I don't think there's any one answer to your question. I think the answer will always, in our economy, let me say it this way, we don't have an EDF. We don't have electricity to France that is 84% owned by the French government. And what the French government wants, they tell EDF, and that's going to be their energy mix. We don't do it that way. We've got 3,000 utilities. What they do is going to be driven by whatever the regulatory conditions are and what the market demands, and by a public utility commission if they're in a regulated environment. So you put all this together, and I don't think there's any one answer, and I think to pretend there is would really be kidding ourselves. 20% for nuclear where we are today has worked very, very well. We could go substantially higher. But I think we need to see how it plays out on a regional and an economic basis to really answer that question.
Nuclear waste. I think it starts and begins with politics and public perception. But what do you see in the future? Do you fear, like I do, that when we're operating nuclear reactors up in the sky together, that our nuclear fuel is going to still be sitting someplace not in a permanent repository and not reprocessed?
Well, I sure hope that's not the case. And the administration has done everything in their power to avoid that. Had quite a discussion on this with the students today, but let me go into just a little of it. I grew up in Nevada. I spent years working at the Nevada test site, and I was working in Nevada at the time of the Screw Nevada bill. And you can ask almost anybody in Nevada today what the Screw Nevada bill is, and they know it. It was the 1987 amendments to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, at a time when Nevada was weak politically, that said we will explore only one option for this country, and it's Yucca Mountain, and that's it. And oh, by the way, you can't even build an interim storage facility until you've started on Yucca. It tied our hands in countless ways, and it set off a reaction in Nevada led by Hank Greenspun, the editor of the Las Vegas Sun, to convince at least Nevadans in Clark County that if nuclear waste came into their state, it was the death of gambling in Vegas. I don't believe that. They were led to believe that transportation of nuclear waste is horrendously dangerous. I don't believe that. There's plenty of data that says that's not the case, but it's what is believed in Nevada. And I think that public opinion in Nevada has been molded in a way that makes it extraordinarily difficult to ever imagine how you could succeed in Nevada. Now, the Department of Energy did put in an application for Yucca Mountain in 2008. When I was at Los Alamos, I directed the Los Alamos research towards Yucca Mountain. And when I was with Senator Domenici, I worked towards opening Yucca Mountain. But I've been working on Yucca Mountain for, whatever that is, 25 years. It's not open, and it's not very close to opening. And I firmly agree with the Secretary and the administration that Yucca Mountain is not a workable solution. And we're far better off to go, as our Blue Ribbon Commission suggested, on a consent basis where we ask for volunteers, and there will be volunteers. That is very, very clear. But we cannot ask for volunteers until we have a change in legislation. We have not had that change. Senate Bill 1240, co-sponsored by, I said it wrong before, I think, Murkowski, Alexander, Feinstein, and Wyden. We've testified is a good framework for moving ahead. But we have folks, particularly in the House, and John Chimkus is one of the leaders, who feels very, very strongly that, as he puts it, Yucca is the law of the land and we should follow that law. I'm not arguing with the statement we should follow the law. I'm saying I'm concurring with the view that it's unworkable and that as a nation we'd be better off to find places that want it. There have been some really nice studies at MIT pointing out how a location that takes the repository, which we know can be done safely, and you folks in this room know it can be done safely, it's an economic gold mine. You look at all the industries that are going to have to come up around a repository, and it's a big deal. There are states that want this. If Nevada doesn't, my view is let's find a state that does. And let's also move ahead with interim storage. I could talk on this for hours, but at least that's a start. But is it a technical solution? No, it is a political problem.
Yes, my question is how to facilitate the excellent expertise at national labs for our supporting of safe operation commercial nuclear plants. Here in Illinois, we've had 2 plants that have really benefited from the Los Alamos polymers that have reduced their dose by 80% and allows long-term operation cycle by cycle from much of the crud removal from the power plant and improving the overall operations. But it's very difficult to get this expertise sometimes to be available to the commercial reactors. And I think for the additional 20 years or even 40 years, it's very valuable to first thank the Department of Energy for the polymer research at Los Alamos that's been used at these plants. Thank you.
Well, I certainly agree on the importance of involving the national labs, but I'm a little puzzled by the statement that that isn't being widely shared in the industry because, frankly, well, I play a role in that, but EPRI and INPO play a really big role in this. I mean, this is what EPRI does. It's just on a slightly different variation, it's what INPO does, to share best practices. So I'm very puzzled if you say that the expertise and the solutions are not being shared. So I have trouble addressing that. To me, 3 Mile Island was a tremendous wake-up call in this country that the industry has to work together. And that led to the formation of INPO and led to sharing of best practices. And they take it very seriously. So I'm puzzled by your comment, and if this really is an issue, I mean, I could find ways to take it on from my office, but I just don't see why EPRI isn't solving the problem. EPRI should be in the business of distributing this information. By the way, much of the program, well, not several of the programs that I do, like my whole light water reactor sustainability program, is co-funded with EPRI. I fund half, EPRI funds half. And to me, that's exactly the way it should be. It's industry's benefiting, EPRI represents industry, and EPRI should be making sure that every plant, because every plant's a member of EPRI, they should be making sure that every plant has the benefit of that knowledge. So if it's not happening, find a way to tell me and I'll see what I can do. But boy, somebody isn't doing their job if that's the case. And Exelon is very good at sharing. Exelon is an outstanding operator. I can say that based on my years at NRC. They really get it. And you've got Exelon here.
Take one last question, Jason.
So you mentioned a bit about, so we had the question about spent fuel and DOE's role in advanced reactor designs. What's DOE's involvement on alternative fuels, fuel reprocessing? Is there any incentive? What do you see as the future of alternative fuel choices over cheap uranium?
Well, when you talk about alternative fuels, if you mean thorium.
Thorium and possibly other metal fuels.
Okay, I'm sorry. Other metal fuels, I don't know of any other metals besides thorium, uranium.
Well, metal uranium, I've heard fast reactor designs including that.
Oh, all right. We have very strong research programs in many different aspects of advanced reactors, certainly including fast reactors. We have supported small programs in thorium at a few universities around the country. Personally, I see no strong benefit to thorium whatsoever. If you had started with the idea that you were going to build a thorium-based cycle, you could have done it. But we've built a uranium-based cycle. I don't believe there's any shortage of uranium, and it would be extraordinarily expensive to switch now from uranium to thorium. So I see very little incentive. Now, as far as metal fuels, from a fast reactor standpoint, there is a very significant debate around the world on the safety aspects for fast reactors, even for any reactor, of oxide versus metal fuels. Our experience in this country at the Idaho National Lab, the EBR 1 and 2, showed what we feel are extremely strong attributes of metal fuels. And Argonne National Lab has pioneered the use of metal fuels. Other countries, France in particular, Russia, have stayed with oxide fuels, even for fast reactors. You can run it either way. The oxide fuels have much higher melting temperatures. That's good. But the point that was so important at EBR was if you use a metal fuel and it overheats, your fuel melts, and you can build your reactor so that it melts in a way that stops running, and that's the end of it. But this is quite an international debate on whether metal or oxide fuels are safer. Probably either one can be safe. In this country, there is far more interest in metal fuels. In fact, I'm not aware of much of any interest in oxide fuels for fast reactors in this country, whereas in France, that's all they talk about. Stay tuned. I think you can make either one safe. I've been listening to Argonne for years, and I think they're right, but not to the point of standing up and saying you can't run a safe reactor on oxide fuels, fast reactor on oxide fuels. So stay tuned. I think we'll see. But we have strong research programs, and eventually decisions are going to be made, I think, on economics as to what we do in this country. Fast reactors simplify waste management. They can simplify waste management. They can lead to more fuel resources. But there's a question of, are we ever going to have a problem with fuel resources? I'm not sure we are. And if we can start to build repositories and prove that they can be done safely, cheaply in this country, you may not want to move to fast reactors just for waste management. So again, I see these as questions that will be answered in the future. In the meantime, we maintain the strong research programs.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a small token for you to remember
Thank you.
Illinois and a poster
Thank you very much.
for you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thanks so much.
Greatly appreciate it.